Hello. Today we're going to talk about Bailey chapters 10 and 11 and compliance codes 5 and 6, behavior analysts as supervisors, and then 6 is behavior analysts' ethical responsibility to the profession of behavior analysis. We'll start with supervision. And, it's obvious that developing qualified and effective new professionals is a critical job for any profession. And I believe that the field of applied behavior analysis and the W5a, the board, recognize that this supervision piece is sort of getting away from us. I think everyone in the field, including the board, understand that we need, in order to produce the most effective behavior analysts, that is, they can increase desired behavior, they're effective at decreasing maladaptive behaviors, they can interact with families and clients, and they're ethical. We need two things. We need the curriculum piece, but that's not all of it. We can't teach all of that in the classroom alone. We also need a very effective supervision experience piece, which is why the board is making a lot of changes. I think this is going to be the emphasis moving forward, is supervision at this point. I think a lot of people recognize this is a big problem. I know several of you have been very candid about your experiences and not being good. This is about, let me be clear, this is about when you guys are BCBAs, that you are effective supervisors. I think it's absolutely critical that you guys make it a point to make sure that you are effective supervisors. Fortunately, WCB has done a lot recently in order to give you the tools to be able to be effective supervisors. And we're going to go over some of those briefly today, but you guys really need to look at this closely, because I think over the next several years, the board is really going to be looking at supervisors and whether they're providing the kind of supervision that I know all of you guys want to have, and the kind that you absolutely need in order to be effective BCBAs. So some of the changes that the board has put in place that make me and others think they're really getting serious about this is, well, now there's a new supervisor training component. That is, every supervisor, before you guys could supervise, you'll have to take I think it's an 8-hour course. I'll go over the curriculum, the task list that's based on, so you understand exactly what those steps are. But you have to pass a a training component. The supervisor training has been added to the CEU certification cycle. As you probably know, once you get a BCBA, you have to get continuing education credits. Every 2 years, you need to have a specific number of CEUs, continuing education credits. 3 of those need to be in supervision. If you're a new supervisor, particularly if you feel your own supervision isn't that great, I would strongly suggest that you take advantage and have most or many of your continuing education uh, units be related to supervision. Every fall we have that Babbitt conference in Amherst, which is great for getting CEUs. They have tons of supervision workshops and supervision seminars that you could attend and learn more about how to become a really effective, a good supervisor, one that is consistent with the BACB standards and consistent with Code 5. So, also, there's revised supervision requirements starting in 2022. Now, again, you guys may not have, and I'm going to review those today too quickly, but you guys may be looking at that and saying, okay, that doesn't affect me as a supervisee, correct? Assuming you get your BCBA before 2022. But it will, it does, it absolutely will affect you as a supervisor. So you need to understand what those new changes are, because it will be the supervisors who are going to be held responsible. And you don't want to be a supervisor who does a bad job, and as a result of that, not only are you going to be subject to scrutiny by the board because you're not following code number 5, but the person that you supervised won't have their experience, very possibly will not be allowed, and they're thinking that they can sit for the exam and now find out they need another 2,000 hours that in order to achieve that. You don't want to be in that position. So we'll look at some of the changes in 2022. By the way, one of those changes is that new BCBAs, unlike now where often their agencies require them to do supervision immediately without really any experience, that they are prohibited from doing any supervision for 1 year, which I think is a great change. There are some conditions under which, and we'll talk about those, new BCBAs can supervise, but for the most part, they are prohibited from doing that. That is something that if you feel like you don't have a handle on this supervision at the point that you get your BCBA, that I would strongly recommend you talk to your agencies about and say you need time. I know several BCBAs that have been graduates of this program who have done that and told their agencies, I need some time, 6 months, a year, to really learn how to supervise and make sure that I'm doing a good job of supervising. In the long run, and you guys can appreciate this, it's going to be better for your organization and better for you, because trainees are going to want to work there because they've heard, and word of mouth, they've heard that supervision is great. So, all right, and finally, the new task list, which goes into effect for 2022, but because this is a 3-year program, we're going to start it in 2019. That is task list 5. Again, doesn't directly affect you guys, but it one of the additions is a whole course, well, 30 hours, but we're doing it as a whole course just on supervision. And in fact, I thought that was so important that Melanie and I worked hard to get that course going for the fall. So we're starting to offer that even starting next fall, because I think it is critical that uh, you as super and you as when you're a supervisor, that you guys really understand exactly how to do this. So the point is, there's going to be a lot of resources, and you guys, could certainly talk to me and Melanie about, um, uh, you know, uh, being part of those classes moving forward if you want to. Um, but the point is, you need to really understand these rules. You need to understand what good supervision is. And when you're a BCBA, you need to take responsibility that that your supervisees are in compliance and you're in compliance with this ethics code. There are a lot of resources, as I'm saying. There's a lot of CEUs. There's a lot of workshops online. There's tons of supervisory um, experiences that you guys can do to get up to speed. So there's really no excuse. We just really need to take this seriously. It's absolutely critical, I believe, for our field. All right, let's get into um, some of the uh, details of this. Okay, so here's some highlights of the Code 5 behavior analysts as supervisors. And basically, it comes down to this, I believe, which is that the code makes it clear that supervisors now have a responsibility to design the supervision and training process. So it isn't just something that, well, people come and you talk to them for a while. You design it. Think about you designing a skill acquisition program or a behavior reduction program for an individual that you work with. The expectations are really exactly the same. One, you need to have a design. You need to plan it out. You need to know what your target behaviors are. What are we going to focus on? What behaviors am I going to try to increase? What behaviors do I need to change? So you need to come up with a design for that particular program, for that particular supervisee. That this design needs to include a written description of how supervision will occur, so like a behavior support plan. The use of feedback. You'll see when you look at the curriculum that is used for training supervisors that the BCBA suggests that behavioral skills training is a critical component of that. And I think you guys are all familiar with that, but basically it means you have clear target behaviors. You set the occasion for those behaviors to occur. You reinforce appropriate behaviors. You use corrective feedback for behaviors that are incorrect. And you monitor the progress. Pretty straightforward applied behavior analysis, but it has to be the same way, the same kind of detail that you would use to do a good plan with individuals that you work with. And finally, there has to be a system to evaluate your supervision. So you need to develop as a supervisor a way to evaluate your supervision. And so, there's a lot of suggestions. The curriculum suggests some things. Again, if you go to workshops or seminars, CEUs, online things, you'll see a lot of different ways that people are attempting to evaluate their supervision. But some of the straightforward stuff would be, well, obviously, feedback from supervisees. It might be after they're done, because you're not going to get honest feedback maybe while they're there, or if there's a way you could get feedback if you supervise so many people that you could anonymously get feedback. You could have another way, of course, to evaluate is their performance. Are they improving? Are they acquiring skills that they didn't have? Can they do preference assessments now and before they couldn't? Could they do functional assessments now and before they couldn't? Can they write effective behavior support plans now? Can they effectively interact with parents and clients now? Can they train other teachers? Whatever that particular job is that they are doing, you would have baseline and treatment data, and that would certainly be another way to evaluate a supervision program. A third way that makes sense to me is to have another BCBA observe your training, your data, your supervision data, and to determine whether they feel, or a supervisor of yours determine that, whether you are an effective supervisor. So that's sort of the highlights and overview of Code 5. But I think it's important enough that I want to, even though I respect the fact that you guys can read, that I want to go over these codes in more detail. So Code 5.01, supervisory competence. So behavior analysts supervise only within their areas of defined competence. So, what does competence mean? Well, Bailey and Birch help us sort of define what they mean by competence, which is training and experience that you as a supervisor has. So if you're working in a clinic with kids on the spectrum, and so there are certain things that just assume that you can do, certain skill acquisition, discrete trial kind of trainings, classroom management, consulting with clients who are on the spectrum. If it's home-based, it's working with parents in the home. If it's residentially based, it's working with staff who are implementing those plans. Functional assessments, preference assessments, so assessments, writing behavior support plans, creating data systems, all of those kind of things. We would assume as a BCBA that you have competence in those. But there may be some areas you don't have competence in as a BCBA, some specialty areas, like if a person has severe feeding disorder where they're not eating, is putting them nutritionally at risk. So we're talking about potentially a severe health risk here. Well, you may not be competent in that area, so therefore you can't possibly be supervising some trainee in how to manage that particular problem, or severe self-injury if you don't have experience with that, or even severe aggression if you don't have direct experience yourself with that. So 5.01, you only supervise within the areas of defined competence. 5.02, it's supervisory volume. This is a new one that they've added because the board knows this one is getting violated a lot right now. That is, behavior analysts take on only a volume of supervisory activity that is commensurate with their ability to be effective. Okay, that is not operationally defined, and you need to operationally define that. You may need to operationally define that with your agency once you get your BCBA and they throw 5 or 10 supervisees at you, of figuring out exactly how that's going to work. Now, what is your ability to be effective? Well, that is, are your supervisees achieving all the goals that you've set up for them, assuming that you have clearly designed a supervision program for them, much like you design a program for your clients or your individuals. And you have to think about, you may have to sit down with your agency, particularly if they're not BCBAs and they don't understand this, and show them these requirements. You're going to have to meet with the person individually for an hour. You're going to have to observe them directly for part of that, and an hour a week. And even if you have multiple people, maybe you could have a group supervision for another hour a week. And then you're going to have to spend more time looking at their data systems, observing their written products, their assessments, their treatment plans. All of that is going to take a certain amount of time. So the board isn't going to say how many people you can supervise, because it depends on what your own clinical responsibilities are. But Bailey and Birch do a nice job, and you could do a nice job of just laying this out. In order to do this right, this is how many hours it's going to take to supervise each person. And you and your agency can work that out. 5.3, supervisory delegation. Behavior analysts delegate only those responsibilities that persons can reasonably be expected to perform competently, ethically, and safely. So, right, you don't throw somebody out with a severe SIB if this is a newbie, they have no experience with severe SIB, and they're working out in somebody's home. That is unethical of you as a supervisor to put them into that position. So you delegate only those responsibilities that they can reasonably perform competently. And again, how is that defined? By data, like everything. It's an empirical question. Are they doing better? Is the individual, the client, doing better? Okay, then things are progressing. 5.4, design effective supervision and training. Behavior analysts ensure that supervision and trainings are behavior analytic in content, effective, ethically designed, and meet the requirements for licensure, certification, other defined goals. So that's the whole design of your training program. One, it's got to be behavior analytic. So, not doing paper and pencil IQ tests, that is not behavior analytic, but focusing on behavior analytic skills and focusing on ensuring that they're effective and ethically designed. 5.5, communication. This is a big one, I think. Behavior analysts provide a clear written description of the purpose, requirements, evaluation criteria, conditions, and terms of supervision prior to the onset of supervision. Wouldn't you like that? Right. I think you would. I would. Therefore, you need to provide that for your supervisees. I'm sorry. When you're a supervisor, you need to be very clear with your communication. This is what I'm going to expect. That doesn't mean that the two of you can't change it, but as things change. But this is what we're going to do, and this is going to take time to sit down and figure out how to do this. 5.6, providing feedback. We talked about that. Critical part of what we do, reinforcement and corrective feedback. And then finally, 5.7, evaluate the effects of supervision. Behavior analysts design systems for obtaining ongoing evaluation of their own supervision activities. So that's going to take time too. Again, there are a lot of examples that you can pick up, a lot of ideas that you can pick up from courses, CEUs. I mean, right now, you could, I'd be happy to give you some resources, but there are tons of groups right now that are doing BACB approved CEUs. The CEUs won't count, but you could certainly take the courses. They're not very expensive. A lot of them are $5-10 to do them online, and get ideas of how to be effective supervisors, how to set up and evaluate supervision activities. So I guess the bottom line with all of this is that you guys are going to be responsible as BCBAs to take full responsibility for ensuring that appropriate supervision occurs and that this code is followed. Now, part of that is keeping up with the newsletters. And I think I've mentioned it before, and I think, now that you guys are in the third year, it's really important that you check the BACB website at least once a month, but on a regular basis. And I know I remind you when there's a new newsletter, but these newsletters come out periodically, not on any regular schedule. But that's the only place you're going to find them. And a lot of them recently, as I have pointed out, have been around supervision, which gives me the impression, and you don't have to be a detective to figure this out, that the board is really starting to hone in on this supervision issue. And so I want to review a couple of the more recent newsletters. Let me see if I can do this technically here. All right, bear with me. All right, here's the curriculum. Now these are all, I'd be happy to review these with you guys, when we're in a face-to-face class also. But you can find all of these obviously in the BACB. But this came out in 2014, well, December 31st, so 2015, when the training component started. So the board's been working on this for quite a while, and it really starts right here, which was in 2015 when they're saying, okay, now you guys, if you're going to supervise, you need to take a course, an 8-hour course on how to be an effective supervisor. And because this is the board, and this is BACB, and because the people who are the board are also BCBAs, well, this is how we do things. So they come up with a curriculum with a task list, just like the task list we have for the academic curriculum. And so you guys know exactly what's going on. I'm not going to go into this in a tremendous amount of detail. Actually, Melanie's going to go into this in a lot more detail in the 3-credit course that she's going to be offering starting in the fall, that you guys could certainly sit in on if you would like. But I want you to be familiar with it. I want you to read these, and I'm going to just sort of go over the highlights. So they do talk about what's the purpose of supervision. So this would be helpful in designing your supervision courses. What is the purpose? Why am I doing this? Well, to facilitate high quality services, to develop behavior analytic, professional, ethical repertoires in specific areas of behavior analytic practice. Right? So make you competent. To guide case conceptualization, problem solving, decision making, and assistance seeking of the supervisee. You know, this is an area certainly we try in the 582, 83, and 84 classes that we offer are attempting to get at focusing on this conceptualization, problem solving, decision making, but nothing is as effective as when it's real, and that is you actually have a case. And how do you conceptualize that case? What's your problem solving? How am I going to address this? This is different. This isn't going the way I thought it should go. What do I do? Affecting your decision making. That's where really good experience with a good supervisor is really going to help pull together all of these things that we're doing in class. Again, part of the whole purpose of supervision, the supervisor should be able to describe the outcomes of ineffective. So if you don't do this, this is the problem. Low quality services, poor performing supervisees, supervisees who do not become effective supervisors in their own practices. This can't be you. You can't have that as an excuse. You've got to become, whether your supervision is great or not, you need to become effective supervisors. All right, so what are some of those features that the board established in 2014-15 that they want to see in every training program? Well, the establishment of performance expectations, descriptions of how supervision will proceed, descriptions of potentially appropriate activities as described in the experience standards. And, you know, those experience standards have changed now twice in the last year. So and we're going to go back and look at those quickly also. But this area is really changing quickly. And that's why you need to stay on top of this in terms of looking at newsletters. Description of competency tests of understanding, so how you're going to measure it. Development and review of contractual agreements, right? You need to have a contract, so what's that going to look like? A lot of people happy to give you examples of that. Assessments, so how are you going to do baseline? Well, interviews, observation, that's generally what we do. Ask the person, gee, have you ever done a preference assessment? No? Okay. And then, yes, we'll observe them. Did they do it right? No, they missed, these 3 steps. Great. So then that becomes part of what you're going to train. As I mentioned, the behavioral skills training we'll talk about in a minute. That is the training method that the board is suggesting. And again, there's nothing complicated about it. It's very straightforward applied behavior analysis. Scheduled observations. So you need to see people engaging in this behavior. Review of written materials, right? You're going to look at data systems, you're going to look at functional assessments, assessment data, you're going to look at treatment plans. You're going to have meetings. They could be individual. Right now, 50% of those could be group. So if you are supervising, say, 5 people, you could meet with each of those individually, minimally for an hour each. That would include observations that you would be doing. And then you could meet with the whole group of them for another hour. They would get their 2 hours a week in that way. Performance evaluations. So how are you going to evaluate their performance? Well, you're going to or when are you going to do it? Well, you could do it during your meetings. Gee, I read your behavior support plan for Adam, and gee, you did this really well. I really like the way you did this. I really like the way you did that. But I think you could have done a better job on the indirect assessment, whatever. And then evaluation of that whole process, as we've talked about. How are you going to get evaluation? Well, you could talk to the supervisee. You feel like you're getting what you need. Oh, no, I feel like I don't really understand how to deal with this particular problem. Great. How are we going to address that? Here's some things you could read. I'm going to observe you working with this person who's doing that, and we'll see if you feel better about it. So that's another way to sort of informally, talk to your supervisees. Are you getting what you feel you need? All right, then the whole thing of behavior skills training, which is the process that the board is suggesting. I'm not going to go over this in a tremendous amount of detail because you guys know this. But as a supervisor, you should be able to explain exactly what behavioral skills training is, and doing role playing, and through individual and group supervision, and that the supervisor should be able to apply behavioral skills training to relevant skills. And here's some of the relevant skills that the board has identified for sure that should occur, which is fundamental behavior change procedures, specialized procedures. So, right, if your clinic focuses on certain specialized feeding clinic, etc., okay, those specialized procedures, data collection and analysis, data conceptualization, problem solving, decision making, resource seeking. How, that's really important that trainees understand. What do I do if I'm lost? Okay, what do I do? I talk to my supervisor. Do I go look in a certain place? So establishing that. And then, of course, the delivering performance feedback. And the board has details of exactly how you would provide positive feedback and corrective feedback, follow-up, and graphically you could show them their data. Wouldn't that be cool if you had a supervisor who actually graphed out your performance on, how many steps you got right in doing a preference assessment, and you could see you could see your improvement. Or maybe you as a supervisor would set up some self-monitoring for the supervisee, and they would be graphing those things out. That would also be cool. And then Evaluation. How do we evaluate it? And they give you a lot of ideas. Evaluation of supervision based on the client's performance makes sense. If the client's doing better, then probably this supervision is working pretty well. That's one measure. Evaluation of supervision based on the staff's performance. Yes. Evaluation of supervision based on intervention specific criteria. So you've established some particular criteria. Are they achieving that? And that could be based on your observations, on their self-observations, on other peers' observations, or a mentor of yours as a supervisor, say a supervisor of you or a mentor observing your supervising performance. And then ongoing, supervisors should be able to describe methods for ongoing professional development for your supervisees, encouraging attending conferences, seeking peer review, seeking mentorship, and then finally the supervisor should be able to describe the following methods for ongoing professional development. So describing all of those things. So review those. Again, those are a good sort of task analysis, a task list of knowledge and skills of effective supervision. If you're hitting all of those, you know you're doing a good job. All right. Let's quickly look at these experience standards. Now, I want to point out, you may have looked at these experience standards before, but they've been updated in October of 2017. So fairly recently, there's been additions. And so those were captured in a newsletter that we'll talk about in a minute. But you really need to be clear. And we don't have time to go over this in detail, but as a supervisor, as a supervisee, you and your supervisor should go over this in detail. That's for sure. If it were me, I would ensure that that's the case. Certainly, as a supervisor, you should make sure that you go over these in detail. So, all right, so so the board bolds this. The BACB requires that the supervisor and supervisee review this entire document together and resolve any concerns before the experience begins. All right, so talks about forms. I don't want to get into that. Pre-existing training, talks about the 8-hour supervision training that you need to do your supervisor needs to do, so that I'm sorry, this is probably confusing for you guys because I'm focusing on you guys as supervisors at this point. So as a supervisor, you need to do that 8 hours of supervisory training. What the qualifications are, well, basically, if you have a BCBA, you're good. If you don't, there's some other things you could have that you probably wouldn't have. So the BC to be a supervisor. The nature of supervision, well, yeah, this has been updated. Development of performance expectations is what we've been saying, consistent with Code 5. Observation, behavioral skills training, delivery of performance feedback, consistent with the curriculum. Modeling technical, professional, and ethical behavior, yes. Guiding behavioral case conceptualization, problem solving, decision making, review of written materials, oversight and evaluation of the effects of behavioral service training ongoing evaluation of the effects of supervision. So that is it. They talk about some of the structure, the supervision contract, details about that, documentation again, which changes all the time, so keep your eyes on that. You know, you guys know all of you guys know are in supervised independent field work. The practicum stuff is or intensive practicum is not relevant for you guys. Onset of experience, this has been consistent that supervisees may not start, and you need to make sure your supervisees know this, may not start accumulating experience until they have completed all of the following: started the coursework, passed the experience standards training module, and secured a qualified supervisor, which hopefully will be you as a BCBA. Clients, activities, yeah, okay, this is one that is changing a lot, and it's going to continue to change. It's changing starting in 2022. What are the activities? So the things that the board wants to see you do are basically think about what a BCBA does. Not necessarily these restricted activities of, if you're assigned to be working with a particular individual and you're carrying out a behavior plan that has been written by somebody else, yeah, that can count for some of your activities, but over time, and this is, I think, going to continue, they're going to decrease the percentage of time that those restricted activities, as now they're referring to them, can occur, and they want more of these unrestricted things, which will include things like conducting assessments, designing, implementing, and monitoring skill acquisition and behavior reduction programs, writing behavior treatment plans, overseeing the implementation of behavior analytic programs, training others, designing systems, communicating and collaborating with caregivers and other professionals, and other activities normally performed by a behavior analyst that are directly related to behavior analysis, such as attending planning meetings, etc. Some of these restricted activity, examples of activities that won't count as experience are attending meetings with little or no behavior analytic contact. So if you're just attending a meeting, but there really isn't much behavioral stuff, then that's not going to account. Providing interventions that are not based in behavior analysis, performing non-behavioral administrative activities, etc. Here's the definitions of these restricted, and this is new language now, restricted and unrestricted. Restricted activities, as I mentioned, the delivery of therapeutic and instructional procedures is restricted. No more than 50%, that's now. That's already changing in 2022. Moving forward, it's going to be reduced even more. But in any case, no more than 50% of the total accrued experience hours may be restricted. Think of restricted activities as you come in, you're assigned to work with this client or these groups of clients. You're supposed to do these discrete trials or carry out these programs. You're restricted in what you can do, as opposed to unrestricted activities, which include all those things we just talked about: observing and data collection, observation of others, training, conducting assessments, meeting with clients, performing behavior analytic assessments, data graphing and analysis, researching the literature related to specific behavior analytic programs, absolutely, writing and revising behavior analytic programs. Okay, so I just wanted to review. You guys really need to be looking at these experience standards because as BCBAs, you are going to be held, if you're supervising anyone, you are going to be held to these standards. And these things are going to be changing very rapidly. For example, here's another change. So this one just came out in October 2017. Some of the things that are talked about in here are already in those experience changes, which were also dated October 2017. But basically, this talks about, I'll let you read it, but this talks about how the board addresses these supervisory issues. And basically, they pull together a group of experts, they sit down, they talk about it, they review it, and then they come up with changes, which they have. So here's the new changes, which will be starting for those people who, excuse me, those trainees starting in 2022. So, you guys will be the BCBA's supervisors for them, so you will be responsible for this. So again, I want you to read this, but I just want to highlight some of the terminology's been changed and it's been simplified. So now, instead of these different categories, it's just called supervised field work standards. And interestingly, they have eliminated the practicum and intensive practicum options. So, and moving forward, again, this isn't until 2022, so it will affect you as supervisors. It will not affect you as supervisees if you get your BCBA before 2022, is it's the number of hours are going to be increased. Or you could do a concentrated supervised field work, which is still 1,500 hours, but you need more meeting time and more field work hours per week. And as I mentioned, now look, the unrestricted hours, activities rather, now that's it got to be at least 60%. So now it's 60% unrestricted, 40% restrictive. And if I had to guess, I'd say that's going to continue. This ratio between individual and small group supervision remains the same. At least 50% has to be individual. We won't spend our time on BCABA. Some of the other changes, and these have been incorporated in that the standards already, as we mentioned, and they're going to keep focusing on this, the nature of supervision. Additions to the nature of supervision reflect the need for greater monitoring of supervisors' performance. So they recognize there has to be greater monitoring of the supervisee's performance, focusing on the training of skills, behavior skills training, and monitoring those skills throughout this supervised field work. So it's basically what we've been talking about. The responsibility of the supervisor is also been changed. So the addition of a section that outlines the responsibility of the supervisor. Basically, you're responsible as the supervisor for everything that your supervisee does. The qualifications. Okay, so this is one of the changes that is going to happen as of 2022. Which is BCBAs will not be allowed to supervise trainees within their first year after becoming supervised. Then they go on to say, if you read this whole thing, that under some conditions, newly certified BCBAs may supervise trainees within their first year after becoming supervised, only if they receive monthly consultation throughout that year from a BCBA with at least 5 years of post-certification experience in supervising trainees. But I think this is a good idea, particularly as this supervision process is transitioning, where the expectations are that there's a lot more responsibility on the supervisor than there has been, that this gives you a year after you get your BCBA and you can stop worrying about the curriculum and taking classes and taking the exam. You've passed all of that. Now you could focus on being a really good supervisor and what that's going to take. All right, and then as we mentioned, the implementation timetable. So the revised supervised fieldwork standards will be effective on January 1st, 2022, and will also be in conjunction with the 5th edition task list. All right. Okay. So bottom line is that as a supervisor, you're going to be responsible for all aspects of supervision. And you guys really need to take this seriously. As I said, I really feel like the board, the field of psychology, and all agree that we need to do a better job with supervision. We're growing way too fast, and there's too many people that aren't getting the kind of supervisory experience that they need. You guys need to make sure that you follow all of these rules. And I know I spent a lot of time on this, but it's because I want you to understand that there are resources out there for you to be able to become supervisors. If you don't want to do this, or you feel like, oh my God, I don't want to do that, great. Then make it clear that you're not going to be a supervisor. You don't have to supervise to be a BCBA. But if you are going to supervise, you have to do all of these things. You need to follow that curriculum. You need to follow that code. Okay. All right, let's move on to number 6. Code 6, which is behavior analysts, ethical responsibility to the profession of behavior analysis. So, right, behavior analysts have an obligation to the science of behavior and profession of behavior analysts. So basically what that means, and the reason that this code was added, is that we have a responsibility as behavior analysts to uphold and advance the values, ethics, and principles of applied behavior analysis. Now, why is that important? Well, because you've got to keep in mind the history of applied behavior analysis. We are brand spanking new, and there are so many misconceptions about applied behavior analysis. I've just been sort of keeping track of things that I've read, things that I've seen, that people are saying about applied behavior analysis that are just misconceptions and wrong. And it's more than just being annoying or funny. It affects how effective we can be, because people have these perceptions about applied behavior analysis. Oh, well, it's so simple. There's only 2 principles, reinforcement and punishment. And I've raised kids, and so I know how to do it. Anybody can do this. It's really straightforward stuff. or applied behavior analysis doesn't work, or reinforcement doesn't work. Um, you know, all you're doing is bribing people to do things. You're not really changing serious behavior. All of these misconceptions that we are primarily punitive, that we basically use unhealthy reinforcers like M&Ms to change, or food, snack foods to change behavior, or punishment. So there really are a lot of misconceptions that adversely affect how effective we can be as behavior analysts. The only way we're going to get from where we are to where we need to be, which is getting people to understand what we're doing, is we as behavior analysts need to take responsibility for explaining what the field is all about. So that's really what Code 6 is all about. So 6.01 is affirming principles. Above all other professional training, behavior analysts uphold and advance the values, ethics, and principles of the profession. Behavior analysts have an obligation to participate in behavior analytic, professional, and scientific organizations and activities. So, right, we have, because it's so new, we have a responsibility to participate in trying to grow the field. And really, I think more than even grow it, it's growing really fast, is clarify it, make it clear to people what it is that we do. And then 6.2, I think, is really important, which is behavior analysts promote behavior analysis by making information about it available to the public through presentations, discussions, and other media. And I think sometimes people think that this disseminating behavior analysis is okay, that's just for like researchers, and but I think clinical people like you guys in the training you're getting to be BCBAs, to provide clinical services, you are in the best position to reach the most people in terms of disseminating what applied behavior analysis is all about. And there's many ways that you guys can do that. And really, that's what I'm going to challenge you to think about how you either have disseminated applied behavior analysis or can. And sometimes it's talking to supervisees, supervisors, families, school systems, but to try to clarify what it is that we do, and disseminating information about behavior analysis, accurate information, of course, to the public. So the assignment for this week is, tell me how you have disseminated, or how you have in the past, or how you could, and think about this, how you could disseminate information about applied behavior analysis in your position, doing what you're doing right now. All right, so also for this week then, if you haven't already, make sure you read chapters 10 and 11. The supervision chapter by Bailey and Birch, I think, is particularly good. Really make sure you read that thoroughly, and review those codes 5 and 6. There's also a YouTube video by John Bailey, so you get to you don't get to see them, unfortunately, but you get to hear them. And talking about supervision. So I want you to watch that also. And I will see you guys in a face-to-face class. Well, not next week. Remember, next week there's no class next week. It's one of those we follow Monday's class schedule on Wednesday. So there is no class next Wednesday, October 10th. So I will see you guys on the following Wednesday. All right. Have a good week or two, and I will see you.